want to welcome everyone to tonight's program, The Industrialization of Sexual Exploitation and Global Capitalism, or Why Sex Work is Not Agency, but Degradation and Nightmare, and Why We Need Revolution. This is a place where you need to be if you wonder, why is it that women face the subjugation, degradation that they do, not just in this country, but all around the world? If you wonder where it comes from and what needs to be done to deal with it. And we're going to go into a particular aspect of that tonight. We're going to have a substantive presentation from Raymond Lotta, and I'll tell you more about him in a minute. And then we're going to open it up for discussion, and we want to have lively, passionate discussion, debate, and yes, struggle over the issues surrounding this question. And we invite and welcome everyone to participate in that. And we ask you to be respectful and scientific in doing that, getting to the reality and getting into our differences over what the reality may be. All of that. We want to see that happen. Now, there are a couple of things. One, we don't want to be interrupted by your cell phone ring. I know you like that ring, but we don't want to be interrupted by it tonight, so take the sound off your phones. No video or recording or photos, please. We've got approved media people who have identification on them, and the video of the event will be posted soon after, so you'll be able to access that. Now, on this media thing, there's media here, and if you are asked to do interviews, make sure the media asking you is legitimate media. Look, MAGA forces, others try to sneak around, get interviews, and use them to basically attack and distort reality. We don't want to contribute to that process. Our media person is Travis Morales, and he can let you help clear up any questions or confusion. I was going to point him out to you. Oh, there he is. That's him. He's off in the back right now. Also, as I want to welcome not just the people here in this room, but there are some people who are with us virtually. I want to welcome them as well. Now, in terms of doing this program, there may be times that the camera is turned towards the audience. If you don't want to end up on the video, the over on that side of the room is not going to end up that way. There are a few seats over there, and maybe some of the people who are over there didn't choose them to stay out of the camera's way, and they might let you have that. Next to the Black History section. Okay, so I've already given you the title of the program. My name is Carl Dix, by the way. Longtime revolutionary, and, well, my shirt gives me away, follower of the revolutionary leader Bob Avakian. Our presentation tonight is going to be done by Raymond Lotta, also a longtime revolutionary, and he's going to be working off of a research paper that he did on the question that he's going to be speaking to tonight, The Industrialization of Sexual Exploitation and Global Capitalism, or Why Sex Work is Not Agency, but Degradation and Nightmare, and Why We Need Revolution. That paper is here, available here in pamphlet form. Some of you may have read it, and if you read it, you'll know that we should be ready and prepared to be taken very deeply into this question, gone at it in an all-sided way, and also gone at from the perspective of why we need revolution, what this has to do with that. And then following his presentation, we'll have some discussion. At that point, I'll announce some upcoming events that are happening here at Revolution Books. And just the last thing I want to say, if Revolution Books is not somewhere you have visited frequently. You should change that. You should come back here, because the kinds of things we're doing tonight, this happens all the time, and you really need to be a part of them, and you really need to support this bookstore. So with that, I'm going to give you over to Raymond Lotta.
Hey, Carl. Okay. All right. I am Raymond Lotta. I am a political economist. I am a spokesperson for Revolution Books. And I am a follower of the revolutionary leader, Bob Avakian, and an advocate for the new communism that Bob Avakian, has developed. I really appreciate everyone coming out tonight, and I do look forward to robust discussion and principled exchange and debate. The topic of my talk, as Carl indicated, is the industrialization of sexual exploitation in global capitalism, or why sex work is not agency, but nightmare and degradation, and why we need revolution. So to start, the commercial sexual exploitation of women and of young girls and boys has reached massive proportions. What is euphemistically referred to as the global sex industry has evolved into a massive, profitable component of individual national economies in the world and of the world imperialist economy as a whole. The sex industry encompasses brothel, street, escort and client-based transactional prostitution, strip clubs and massage parlors, pornography, military prostitution, global sex tourism, and the unspeakable horror of sex trafficking. In this increasingly integrated and unequal world economy, women from impoverished third world countries are lured and trafficked to rich imperialist countries, sold off or kidnapped into sexual exploitation by militaries and gangs, and drawn into prostitution as a survival strategy. When we talk about the dimensions of the sex industry, it has grown into an industry that generates several $100 billion a year. Sex trafficking, sex slavery alone was generating more than $100 billion a year in the mid-2010. And that's more than the combined profits of Google, Microsoft, Nike, and Starbucks in those years. In countries like Thailand, the Philippines, Indonesia, prostitution and the sex industry account for anywhere from 2 to 14% of the economic activity of these countries. In Bangladesh, the so-called brothel villages are replenished with a steady stream of trafficked women and children. There are supply chains and pipelines that bring women from Ghana to Western Europe, from Nepal to India, from China to U.S. massage parlors. There are some 45 million prostitutes in the world, 80% of whom are female, most of them 13 to 25 years old. Most are beholden to pimps, and survey after survey reveals that the great majority of these voluntary prostitutes don't want to be doing this. Listen to Poi's story. She was a young woman born in a poor rural village in Thailand, married at 17, and now has 5 children. Since her husband left the family, she has to maintain herself and the family. Without much education and job opportunities, she goes into the city and starts to sell herself at a bar. She performs sex acts that she finds abominable, but it is the source of the meager income that can be sent to the children. She sees this as the best of all choices. In 2021, some 4.4 million women and children were trappicked for sexual slavery. 4.4 million women and girls. Listen to Mary's story. She was a promising high school student from the Nigerian state of Edo. She dreamed of going to the university. She was 16 when a woman approached her mother and offered to take her daughter to Italy to find work. Mary's family pushed her to accept the offer, to lift the family out of poverty. Mary wound up being trafficked into prostitution. For 3 years, forced into selling her body, enduring beatings and threats at gunpoint, and forced to watch the brutal degradation, carrots violently inserted into the vaginas of even younger girls as an object lesson for what might happen if she resisted. The scale and horror of sexual exploitation in the oppressive sex industry is veiled by two major factors. First, there are complex and overlapping legal and illegal channels of supply, marketing, and monetization of globalized sexual exploitation. There are the internet payment mechanisms, foreign currency flowing to governments from overseas, sex workers, telecommunication companies that provide pornography entertainment, and international hotel leisure industry bound up with expanding sex tourism, and the airline companies that transport these tourists, banks that lend capital to these sectors, the internet and cybercurrency serve as tools facilitating and hiding the trade in sex and sexual exploitation. There are the smugglers whose human cargo simultaneously serves cheap labor production in export factories and mines and for commercial sexual exploitation. The second factor that obscures the enormity and the oppressiveness of the global sex industry is that the sexual degradation and violent subordination of women has become increasingly normalized as a given of contemporary economic life and culture, as fashion, as lucrative pornography, as employment. And in the realm of political intellectual discourse, sexual subjugation has been poisonously rationalized as an expression of individual choice and agency on the part of women. Submission of women to male fantasy, sexual humiliation, and domination are folded into the now normalized occupational category of sex work. Which brings me to my first point of clarification and controversy. Calling oppression by another name does not change the essence of sex work. And prostitution and pornography are part of a larger matrix of the subjugation of women and the socialization and entitlement of men. Yes, sex work is work. And to be clear, prostitutes, sex workers should not be criminalized, persecuted, and abused. They're human beings whose humanity, as is the case for all women, is denied, devalued, and endangered. But let's also be clear that sex work is not just work. It is the female body for sale, on offer, for sexual control, domination, and degradation. Whether non-consensual or consensual, this activity represents the extreme commodification and objectification of the female body. Let's watch this brief clip from Bob Avakian on sex work.
Sex work, that's agency. No, it's not. It's oppression. It's institutionalized, financialized degradation of women. Some of these people say, well, under capitalism, any kind of job you have is exploitative, so what's the difference in sex work? Well, there is a difference. Yes, capitalism is a system based on exploitation, and especially super exploitation of people, including, as I said, more than 150 million children in the third world. But, if you're working in a factory, say in Bangladesh, as a woman producing clothes, you're being exploited in producing those clothes. But the product you're working on and producing is clothes. If you're working in the so-called sex industry, which is just, as I said, vicious exploitation and institutionalized and financialized degradation of women, because what is the product? Besides your exploitation, what is the product? The product is the degradation of women. It's not clothes, it's not food, it's not televisions. The product, besides your exploitation, the product is the degradation of women. That's the whole point of it.
The product of sex work is not only exploitation, but the degradation of women. And sex work is not simply a sphere of work. It is part of a larger matrix of the structural sexual oppression of women. I'm talking about rape and sexual violence, including marital rape, domestic battering and abuse of children, women in the U.S. and elsewhere denied the right to abortion and control over their reproductive choices. The pervasive commodification of the female body in advertising, entertainment, fashion, a beauty industry that tells girls and women what their bodies must look like, young men trained in guy culture, unrelenting sexual harassment in the workplace, that multi-billion-dollar pornography industry that equates pleasure and arousal with domination, pain, and humiliation, and the racialized sexual stereotyping of Black, brown, and Asian women. The world is a growing horror for women. 1 of 3 women in the world on this planet will be physically or sexually assaulted in their lifetimes. Nearly 1/3 of teen girls in the U.S. say they have considered suicide. There is an escalating war on women. Again, the right to abortion stripped away. Christian fascists seeking to push women into even more open subordination to husbands and men. Women contained, confined, suffocated by what Bob Avakian has called the 2 outmodeds in the world. The outmoded economy and culture and ruling strata of the imperialist countries and the imperialist system with its putrid commodification of everything, and reactionary Islamic and other fundamentalisms reflecting the outlook of the historically outmoded strata among colonized and oppressed humanity. I'm talking about the market for sex on the one hand, and the veil and the hijab forced on women on the other. Women's dehumanization in modern and medieval form. And the women of Iran have heroically risen up against the theocratic patriarchal state. I come to my second point of analysis and controversy. One might choose to be a sex worker, but you don't get to choose the choices. The fact that people might choose to become a sex worker does not change the nature of prostitution. Yes, this could be a choice that an unemployed, poorly paid woman might make, an unemployed or poorly paid woman might make in order to feed her children. Or it could be the choice of an upper middle class graduate student to maximize her income and her study time. Or it could be a choice that a trans person kicked out of a family or denied work might make in order to survive and seek some kind of affirmation. But all this is an indictment of a system based on exploitation, profit, and gender oppression. Why is dealing drugs or joining gangs or going into the U.S. imperialist military part of the narrow range of choices that this system offers poor black and brown youth? The choices people confront flow from the nature of this system. Let me repeat that. The choices that people confront flow from the nature of this economic social system of capitalism, imperialism. But individual choices also have social effect and consequence. A woman might choose to produce or participate in pornography, and it might involve consensual sex. But pornography has a social effect. It shapes the outlook of young boys and men in general, and women as well, as to what is acceptable, expected, indeed valued in the realm of sexual relations. Let me put it more starkly. Back in 2011, members of a Yale fraternity gathered in front of the Yale Women's Center holding placards and chanting, "No means yes, yes means anal." Boys and men are socialized sexually by pornography. It is a primary source of information about sex for young people, and young men are habituated to regard the depiction of sex in pornographic film and other media as realistic. So the individual choice to engage in pornography has real social effect. And by the way, in that same survey I cited, it's a 2022 survey of the sadness and depression affecting teenage girls in the U.S., 1 in 7 of those teenage girls said that they experienced forced sex as teenagers already. Now, there are those who defend sex work as the exercise of bodily autonomy, the right to do with one's body as one desires. And some people have written revolution books or emailed us that there's a contradiction to say that you uphold the right of a woman to control her reproductive choices and destinies, yet oppose bodily autonomy when it comes to sex work. But again, we have to look at the social content of rights and whether they harm or benefit society from the standpoint of the well-being of society and the struggle to end oppression. Women's right to abortion is vital to the emancipation of women, to their ability to participate fully and equally in society, because forced motherhood is female enslavement. But when a right-wing fanatic says no one can tell me to get a vaccine, it's my body, this anti-scientific individualism damages the well-being of society. To my third point of analysis and controversy, wake up to the fucking globalization and industrialization of sexual exploitation. Now, I've said some things about this, but I want to go deeper. The feminist scholar Catherine McKinnon has commented that prostitution is not the world's oldest profession, but the world's oldest oppression. Now, Marxism understands the subjugation of women as bound up with the historic division of society into exploiters and exploited, masters and slaves. But imperialist globalization of the last 50 years has brought about an unheard of, a mammoth scale and horror of global sexual commerce and sexual exploitation. Now, the industrialization of prostitution refers to the condition that this sexual exploitation and commerce has become large scale, highly organized, and concentrated through legal and criminal enterprise, and subject to widespread global diffusion. But what has driven this? What has brought more women, millions upon millions, into the global sex industry and its supply? Now, people can look at my pamphlet where I go into this rather extensively, but I want to briefly point to two key factors. Over the last 50 years, traditional peasant agriculture in the global south, the oppressed countries of Asia, Latin America, Africa, and the Middle East, this small-scale farming that supplied basic foods and means of survival has been undermined and devastated by imperialist agribusiness, investor-driven land grabbing, and industrial, mining, and other projects. There has been a massive expelling of people from land, employment, and home in the countryside of the world. Overwhelmingly, again, in the global south. But by the start, overwhelmingly in the global south. As I said, we're talking about hundreds of millions of people expelled from the rural areas of the third world. As late as 1983, the majority of the world's workers were still in agriculture. But by the start of the 2010s, only 25% of the world's workers were in agriculture. People have streamed into the megacities of the global south. Yet new industrial and service jobs are not being created anywhere on the scale to absorb farmers and peasants pushed off the land by poverty, civil wars, imperialist investment and competition, and global warming. This is creating a huge surplus of laborers. Some women go into the garment and other export processing factories. Others become maids and migrate abroad. And many are forced to find work in the burgeoning sex industry, with many tricked into becoming sex slaves. So that's one factor, this huge social economic transformation in the world economy. Let me point to a second factor driving the industrialization and globalization of prostitution: the U.S. imperialist military. During the war in Vietnam, a huge brothel economy to cater to U.S. troops was forged. In the 10 years of America's genocidal war, that's 1965 to 1975, some 400,000 to 500,000 Vietnamese women and girls became prostitutes. Think about that. Almost 500,000. This military prostitution spread throughout Asia to Thailand, the Philippines, and Indonesia. The U.S. organized and protected it. And this created the initial infrastructure, and it was a massive one, for the sex tourism in today's world economy. Think about it. In Thailand in the 1990s, anywhere between 200,000 and 800,000 prostitutes were under the age of 18. What kind of life? What kind of future for these girls? What kind of life? What kind of future for the trafficked women forced to service 12 to 20 men a day, physically abused and psychologically tortured? Yes, living in the heartland of imperialism that allows people a certain share of the spoils of the U.S. empire, an empire that promotes incredible parasitic individualism. Well, living in the heartland of imperialism, you can avert your gaze from the reality of the horror of this world and wax on about sex work as empowerment. Which brings me to the final point. We don't have to live this way. This too is part of reality. We can do far better than deluding ourselves that we can own our own oppression. We can make a revolution to overthrow this capitalist imperialist system and put an end to that oldest oppression and to all exploitation and oppression. A revolution to create a society and world where women are not on display and viewed as sexual objects or see themselves as marketable sexual objects, where there is full equality between women and men and differently gendered people, where we can go to work on uprooting patriarchy and male supremacy. A total revolution that transforms the economy, the ways that people relate to each other, everything. A society that fosters sexual relations based on shared affection, mutual pleasure, and equality. The vision and blueprint for this liberatory socialist society is found in the Constitution for the new socialist republic in North America that someone could hold up or... Right, they put it in there. Revolution Books is prepared. So this is the Constitution for the new socialist republic in North America, that vision and blueprint for a liberatory socialist society. It was written by Bob Avakian, the leader of this revolution. The socialist economy abolishes private capitalist control over the means of producing wealth. It puts an end to the measuring rod of profit. It applies the resources of society towards meeting social need and towards the betterment of humanity. Women, men, trans people will not be forced to seek out prostitution to feed children and pay rent. The family and the primary responsibility within the family of women as principal caregivers will radically change. There'll be new living and working arrangements that break down isolation and fragmentation. The rearing of children will increasingly become the responsibility of society. Traditional gender roles will be interrogated, challenged, and transformed. Art and culture will be spawning grounds of new thinking and attitudes. It's not a fixed playbook. There will be standards and criteria furthering the emancipation of women and overcoming all oppressive divisions among people. And there will be experimentation at the same time. There'll be broad debate and continuing struggle to transform society. The new state power will give backing to women and to all fighting to carry the struggle for the liberation of women forward. And within the framework of a society moving towards eliminating all exploitation and oppression and creating a world community of humanity, the new socialist society will foster unprecedented dissent and intellectual ferment. The educational system, I'm excited by the vision, the educational system will train people to take up the scientific method and approach to the natural and social world and to be critical thinkers. All this contributes to the ability of people to more deeply understand and profoundly change the world. Now, we are in a moment in history, a rare time, when it becomes more possible to make this revolution that I'm talking about. And this is so principally so because of the sharpening divisions within the U.S. ruling class and sharpening polarization in society overall. It is a highly volatile situation, and also a highly dangerous one. There is the potential for full-out fascism, and these fascist forces are rampaging throughout society, outlawing abortion, trying to prevent the teaching of black history, demonizing and wanting to quarantine trans people. There's the growing danger of world war. And there is the real possibility, the danger of quantum leaps in the fascist program to institutionalize traditional morality and control over women, alongside the even greater expansion of the sex industry. So here you have a lethal and poisonous combination of high-tech social degradation and the enslavement combined with repressive fundamentalism. Things are coming to a head. Something terrible or something truly emancipating, as Bob Avakian has put it. A world of growing horrors or a radically different and far better world. You know, I've spent time talking about choices. So here's the question. Are you going to allow your dreams for something better to be confined to choosing the best terms of commodification within this system? Or are you going to take up the liberating cause of revolution to radically transform the choices that all humanity could have? Yes, let's talk about agency. Let's talk about the conscious, collective, revolutionary agency to change the world. That's the challenge to act on. So let me end with this passage from Bob Avakian. You cannot break all the chains except one. You cannot say you want to be free of exploitation and oppression, except you want to keep the oppression of women by men. You can't say you want to liberate humanity, yet keep one half of the people enslaved to the other half. The oppression of women is completely bound up with the division of society into masters and slaves, exploiters and exploited. And the ending of all such conditions is impossible without the complete liberation of women. All this is why women have a tremendous role to play, not only in making revolution, but in making sure it is all the way revolution. The fury of women can and must be unleashed as a mighty force for proletarian revolution. Thank you very much.
Okay, we got a little bit of rearranging to do up here to continue going on. While we're doing that, let me just tell you a little bit about Revolution Books. Revolution Books is the intellectual, political, and cultural center for a movement for an actual revolution right here in the belly of the beast. It's a bookstore with books about the world and books for a new world. And at the heart of its mission is the work of the revolutionary leader Bob Avakian, who has been referred to a couple of times tonight. He is the architect of a new framework for human emancipation, the guy who brought forward the new communism, which is something you need to learn more about and dig into if you want to see a totally different and far better world. This is the kind of place where we have events like tonight. We have author events where authors come in and read from and talk about their books, cultural events, film showings. This is a bookstore that you need to frequent very regularly, both for the books here, but also for the events, and just to come by and talk with us here. You might find some very interesting discussion, film clips that you could view by coming into Revolution Books. And we need your support for this bookstore to continue to survive and thrive. You can talk with people like, well, one of them's hiding over here. Brenda, people back at the counter. Jane, there she is. She was right behind me. To learn more about the bookstore. couple of upcoming events. I mean, we're going to dig into this and dive into it. And if the conversation and discussion whets your appetite for, is it really possible to end this oppression, degradation, and misery, now is really the time to get connected up with Revolution Books. Going in reverse order, on March 11th, International Women's Day, a celebration here at 3 p.m. here in Revolution Books. If you're infuriated by the Supreme Court overturning the right to abortion, if you're inspired by women of Iran and Latin America rising up for women to be free, if you have ever wondered if women could be liberated from a world of exploitation, male supremacy, and all forms of gender oppression, you need to be part of this celebration. Saturday, March 11th at 3 o'clock. You want to find out more about it? I think, again, it's Jane that you could talk to. I mean, you could also talk to me. And rolling back towards now, Sunday, 3 o'clock. We're going to dig more into this question of capitalism and patriarchy, how they are woven together, and get into some discussion and debate and even struggle over, are they woven together, and how do we rip them apart? And we'll be able to also go further into things that are raised and discussed and debated here today. That's Sunday at 3 p.m. here at Revolution Books. And if you want to be a part of planning for International Women's Day, tomorrow, Thursday, 6 o'clock, there's going to be a planning meeting, in person and virtual. And is it Jane again? That you need to talk to about that. Okay. So now we're going to open things up for discussion. And Emma from the Revolution Club is going to join us for this. So, Raymond has laid out quite a bit. He didn't hold back. So, we're opening it up now. Let's get into it.
Me?
Yes.
And there's a mic.
Yes. They're giving it to her.
I understand that this is an extremely emotional issue. I am a dissenter. I happen to be the daughter of an American communist. Some of you may have heard of John M. Cammett, who wrote a book in 1967 called Antonio Gramsci and the Origins of Italian Communism. When I became a prostitute and a minor pornographic film star at the age of 27, he certainly did not approve. One of the mythologies about prostitutes is that we lack a father figure. That certainly was not true about me. He loved me and was dedicated to me and never once touched me, fondled me, although I had a beautiful body when I was young. Never said anything flirtatious or seductive to me, ever. And on occasion, when I've had to seek therapy, as many of us have, the first question I was always asked was, oh, your father probably... No, he didn't. That's infuriating, and it's very, very important that we not approach this whole thing in generalities that are too broad, be too puritanical or dismissive of people's experience. I beg to disagree with you about my experience as a pornographic actress. I read Catherine McKinnon's books very thoroughly. They were so full of distortions of my experience that it was very hard to take. I felt not unlike a teenaged girl in Catholic school listening to the priests and nuns preach about abortion. That's just how much it was alienated from my sexuality. I must tell the truth and revive the consciousness-raising practice that we started in 1972 among women in saying that, for reasons that I won't go into, I had felt so much shame and fear about sex when I was very young that making porn movies, and not all of them were degrading to me, they were not, set my spirit free and relieved me of an enormous, enormous amount of shame and fear. And in the course of the 20 movies that I made, I was hurt once. One time.
You were what?
I was hurt once. Okay. Once. The other 19 times, I had the time of my life. And I reject the idea that all of the men who did it with me were degrading me. Most time it was making love, and sometimes it would have met the definition of what the early group called Women Against Pornography said. Eroticism shows mutual respect between two human beings. When I worked with my partner, Ron Hudd, who was the main person I worked with, we had passionate, beautiful sex, and the pornographers kept putting us together again and again because people were drawn into it because we looked beautiful together. It was obvious that I loved him and that he loved me. They allowed eroticism. I was a prostitute for much longer than I made porn movies. I did it for 25 years. I did other things while I was doing it, but although I certainly admit that it isn't for everybody, and that I'm 100% anybody ever being forced into it, it's because I did it voluntarily, that I'm passionately against pimping. And I don't know if you heard the CD that I made. It was saved here for you. Did anybody hear that? Some of us did. Okay. I need to mention the fact that if anybody wants to hear that, it's between me and a black man, not because I think all black men are pimps or that all pimps are black men. Please don't accuse me of that. I was lovers with a black man 16 years ago who some of you may know. He's a very good musician named Raheem Bey. And he was a pimp when he was very young, and we wrote a duet together as if there were a streetwalker on the street. And I said, freezing on the corner in that little short skirt, even when he beats you, it doesn't really hurt. And he says, it's all about the money being spent and made, so get back on that corner and get my cash up today. Fucking strangers every day is not helping your libido. Your pimp is a parasite just like a mosquito. Cash keep you laced up, made up, and fly. She ain't dropping it right. I can't rap the whole song, obviously, but I've been involved with denouncing pimping and trafficking for as long as I was doing prostitution voluntarily. The belief that this completely distorts the woman psychologically certainly was not my experience. I had a wonderful time sometimes. And we may all remember that, and I won't say too much more because I don't want to take up too much time here, that movie that came out in 1975, the older of us remember, called Hearts and Minds, about Vietnam, where somebody sneaked a shot of two Vietnamese prostitutes with two young GIs. They obviously didn't know they were being filmed, and when I watched that, I had a very, very different reaction than most people. It's possible that those women were enjoying themselves very much. This is a very controversial thing for me to say. But those handsome young GIs made great customers. I dealt with military guys. That's different from having to bend your head the way you may have to deal with an old man. And when soldiers are in combat duty, they may be very appreciative of what they're getting and act very sweet and very friendly because life and sex are intimately linked.
Are you going to answer that?
I won't say any more.
Okay, thank you for your candor. Yeah. Are you going?
Questions, or should I
No, I think we should stay. We're going
stick on this topic?
Yeah, let's. I mean, someone has told us quite a bit.
Yeah.
So, I mean, we're going to stick. We're going to talk about this.
Yeah.
So, do you want to say something?
Yeah, I would like to say something. I mean, I guess I think that that the fact that we live in a society where women are trafficked, or, you know, you said, I appreciate what you were saying about, you know, women being pimps, women being prostituted, all the degradation that women face, all of this. And I think that we have to ask, what does that have to do? What is that whole idea of trafficking women? What does that have to do with an idea of how women are treated? as treated as you're a sex object. You're something to be used for the pleasure of men. And I do think that that's different than erotica. And I do think that that's different than two consenting adults filming each other or whatever, experimenting with things, you know, for pleasure. I think that there's a difference between those two things. But I think the idea that, like, that the objectification of women and being against that is anti-sex, I just, you know, sort of reject that. I'm not rejecting your experience or saying what your experiences was, but we actually have to look at what is the overwhelming experience of women around the world, and what does that have to do with a society that objectifies women, that treats them as sexual objects. And I guess that's a question that I would put back to the audience, is that A, do we live in a patriarchal society where women are beaten all over the world, where women are treated as sex objects, where they're raped, battered, brutalized? Is that the case? And does that actually, is there any relationship between that and, like, the ways that people get trained to look at sex and relations between each other, and even, like, the choices that people have?
You know, I just want to quick, again, I appreciate your speaking. I wanted to say a few things. One, you know, I cited some statistics about, you know, the scale of prostitution in the world. And we have to analyze the social phenomenon of prostitution. And I mentioned, you know, that the vast majority of prostitutes in the world, you know, are pimps. The overwhelming majority. The vast majority of them are, you know, women and young women, you know, aged 13 to 25. And the vast majority of them in every survey, as I indicate, don't want to be doing this. They're forced, not all by pimps and traffickers, but they're forced by circumstances, by economic and social circumstances, by being locked out of other, you know, choices and opportunities. And, you know, one can say that my individual experience was this, you know, and I, you know, had a certain degree of control over my situation. But when we pull the lens back and look at this as a global social phenomenon, it has certain features. And those features involve domination, subjugation, the submission of women, you know, to male fantasy and entitlement, and an individual experience, you know, is a real experience. But that experience is not expressive of what this whole social phenomenon is about. And I did, you know, look at you, Lisa is your name, right? I did, you know, actually look at your paper that you dropped off here, and you know, and you say some things in the paper that I profoundly disagree. I mean, several that I profoundly disagree with. That, you know, for instance, you say it is absurd that men could be otherwise than what they are. As well.
Please let me qualify that. I also was very careful to say that the women and the men here are real. I was very careful to say that the women and the men here are really extraordinary, and that the vast majority of men in the world have a very, very different attitude about sex and women than you'd find in this room. I was very, very careful to say I don't want you guys to be insulted.
The what?
You're much more sophisticated, much more enlightened, much more decent than average. But I do believe profoundly that there's a psychosexual difference between men and women. And may I say, I largely agree with what you're saying about the fact that much too much of it is involuntary, and I go along with that. That I'm 100% against stopping pimping and trafficking. I go along with that. And my concern is that I don't believe, on the basis of all of my experience, that thinking that this could be stamped out or stopped is realistic or possible. I do believe that there's a profound psychosexual difference between men and women in general with our attitude about sex, and that not unlike the issue of abortion, where right-wingers and conservatives say, oh, that's a human being and we can change society enough so that we can preserve every human being. We're never going to be able to stop prostitution. Although I want women to have alternatives, even in the most ideal society where we had no genocide, no racism, no colonialism, as little war as possible, this is still going to go on because the demand on the part of men is too great, and the supply on the part of women who want to do it the way I did it is also too great. And making it illegal is going to cause affiliation with other right-wing views about sex that are authoritarian. That's what I was trying to say.
But what you're saying, let me just say, and we're going to have to open it up.
Of course, I'm
but
sorry.
What you're saying, what you're describing about the demand for prostitution and for sexual services and men's psychosexual makeup, this is all a product of patriarchal society. It's not genetically programmed. It's not a given for how all human society must be and can only be. It is an acceptance. Your argument is an acceptance of the patriarchal status quo in which women are providing sexual services to men who have a greater sexual need for those services, but that is how they're socialized. That is how the society functions. Male supremacy entails entitlement to sexual conquest and domination and the submission of women to their will and caprice. Now, that is how this society functions, and people internalize those values, including women. And the revolution that we're talking about is a revolution to change all of that. Why are women seeking employment in prostitution? The principal reason is economic. I mean, there's no argument about that. Why are men seeking out prostitutes? Because in a patriarchal society, in this capitalist imperialist society, the sexual market, the market for women, to satisfy male lust, which is socialized, exists because of the subordinate position of women, their role in society as caregivers, as offers of their bodies, as objects. And so many, if you look at so many memoirs of prostitutes, and I've read them, the phenomenon of detaching your mind from your body is so pervasive. And then there are people, your situation, okay, in which, there's an element of what, you've put on the table here of, genuine erotic attraction and feeling, etc. But this is so peripheral and marginal to what we're talking about. And I just am very, very distressed by the way in which you are absolutizing women's, the psychosexual makeup of men. And then you have, that is the rationalization for prostitution in the world, historically. So I do think that, it's something to consider. And then there is a disbelief in what you have said and what you've argued in your paper, right, that we could get to another place in human social sexual relations where sexual relations can, as I said in my talk, be based on mutual affection, shared pleasure, and equality. Now, are there rivulets of that, that might present themselves in your life experiences? Yes. But that is not the social phenomenon of prostitution on a global scale. I just want to stop there, and I'd like to just bring other people in.
Of course.
And we can talk more, and I have your paper, so and we should pursue this further. Okay?
Yeah,
I've just one thing to say. One thing. How long do you think it's going to take for the majority of men in the world to be as civilized as you are?
Well, on the basis of making revolution, things can be changed. Okay, there's.
But wait, I just have to say one thing. Just one. I can.
No, hold it.
Yeah, listen. We're going to call on him in a second. But look, people can. Hey, Carl, what are you doing?
I'm telling the person with the mic.
Okay. But I just want to say that people can change and radically change and rapidly change. We saw that in the 60s. Okay, we saw, in a very brief moment of history where attitudes towards sexuality, where people's thinking about racial inequality, about the role of the U.S. in the world, this changed very radically. And it had to do with struggles in the world, the fact that there was a revolution in China that was inspiring people. There was a women's liberation movement. There was a black liberation movement. There were women's consciousness groups that were formed. I mean, you pointed to that. There was a whole new kind of a culture, not just of resistance and liberation, but a culture that was re-examining what were considered to be all the norms and all the unchangeables in society. And the revolution that we're talking about, as I said, we're in a rare time, when it becomes more possible to make that revolution. And we can, on the basis of seizing power, make big changes right away. I mean, across the board, whether we're talking about police brutality and terror, that doesn't have to exist in a society based on the socialist society. And we can go to work quickly, legalizing the right to abortion, healthcare, services, sex education, right? And people will be experimenting with new, modalities of love and friendship and shared pleasure. But we can do that on the basis of a new society, a new economy, and a new state power. So the answer to your question is, yes, there can be radical transformative change, and that change has to continue. It has to deepen. And in the new socialist society, the vision and blueprint that's laid out in this Constitution, it is, and in the writings of Bob Avakian, the point is made that the struggle for the full emancipation of women will be a radical driving force to carry this revolution forward and to accelerate the very kinds of transformations that we're talking about. So I just wanted to say that, and let's go further.
Okay. I have to note that your thing from the movie Hearts and Minds about the USGIs and the Vietnamese prostitutes, not how it overall was. Just not. I talked to a whole lot of GIs who went to Vietnam, and that is not how they approach women, not how they approach Vietnamese women who were into prostitution. I won't get deeply into it. Let's go on. But I just had to note that. The guy there with the blue, that's blue, right? Sure. I was not
what are you
going.
saying?
I was not going there.
I would like to thank the lady for attending tonight. I'm very excited to be here. We're celebrating hip-hop 50 years, and there was a song by Salt and Pepper, Let's Talk About Sex. And I do not partake in pornographic, but I do attend Exotica, which is a convention. And it's to learn. It's to, because the stigma, the sex, if you go back into the temples of Greece and India, the origins of the prostitution, they were teachers. They would teach whoever was walked through those temples to learn about sexuality. But I believe that was at a different era. That was when women were on a different pedestal than today's role in society. But we need to educate each other. We have to come together like this and discuss this. And because statistics even show that in the gay, lesbian, I forgot what it's called, almost 75% are sexually abused. So we have to educate ourselves, teach about the freedom. And I'm just glad that this is taking place today. And I thank everyone for being here.
All right. Okay. Now the guy you gave it to before.
Hi, not a guy, non-binary. My name is Giuseppe Garandi. I'm a master's student at the Journalism School of Columbia University. I specialize in sex work reporting, specifically from a transgender lens. Admittedly, I didn't know much about your organization, this bookstore, and I have not read Avakian's constitution, so the answers might all be there. But I'm curious, just as on a yes or no type of question, if a bill to decriminalize sex work, or to use current legal terms, to decriminalize prostitution, was on the table tomorrow, at least in New York State, not legalize but decriminalize sex work, would your organization be pro that bill or against it?
The question you're asking about decriminalization versus legalization, or
No,
just quite frankly, yeah. If tomorrow a bill was on the table to decriminalize sex work, at least in New York State, would you be for it or against it? Your organization, what you represent, yes or no, like for or against?
yeah, we would support decriminalization of prostitution, but we have to be very nuanced about this. We want to decriminalize it because prostitutes, I mean, the number of people should not be subjected to this kind of harassment and persecution. We know that a large measure of the suffering experienced by prostitutes is by not only from their pimps, not only from their johns, but also from the fucking police and the legal system. So it should be decriminalized. These women should be destigmatized. And I just want to make it clear in reference to the earlier comments that this is not an attack on the character and the dignity of these women who are forced into prostitution. So it should be decriminalized, but not legalized. In other words, the vision here is not let's have the Netherlands, let's have Amsterdam, where you have a legal sex industry and regulated by the state with contraceptives and testing provided for these, for the prostitution industry in the Netherlands, which, by the way, represents about 5% of that economy as well. So what we're talking about is decriminalizing because this is a just demand, but not leaving that. And we want to, make a revolution so that we can get rid of prostitution, not by rounding up, and putting, prostitutes into camps to be punished, and, but by actually creating a whole new society, where the need for prostitution is no more for the women who partake of it, and where this is not institutionalized and monetized, by the imperialist system. You're no longer operating according to profit. You're no longer perpetuating the relations of male dominance. All of this is being transformed. So we want to get to a world where you don't have prostitution, and you can't get to that world within this social economic framework for all the reasons we've gotten into. So I want to make a distinction between decriminalization and legalization. By the way, a lot of pimps and the sex industry globally is totally in favor of legalization. You could understand that. The traffickers and, the hotels and the sex tourist, magnates, et cetera, right? And what we're talking about is the struggle against, male supremacy, the struggle, to put a stop to the degradation and objectification and commodification of the female body. And in a society based on commodities, and the private ownership of wealth and the sale, and the sale and exchange for the purpose of enrichment and advancement at the expense of others, you can't solve this problem. And patriarchy, and this is the discussion that Carl and others are going to get into on Sunday, but patriarchy is absolutely integral and essential to the functioning of the capitalist imperialist system. And that's another discussion to get deeply into why, what it has to do with the socialization of children, what it has to do with the transmission of wealth, what it has to do with the maintenance of social order. And that's a lot of what's driving the right-wing Christian fundamentalist, crusade, to put women, back in their place. And I saw we got a question from a viewer about, this phenomenon of male revenge in today's world. And, I can speak to that a little later. So that's I hope that's answering your question.
Just a brief follow-up. Is your organization doing any work to advocate for the decriminalization of sex work?
No, we uphold that, but we're not involved in that struggle. And what we are involved in is putting a lot of attention to the struggle around abortion. We've been, we helped, Sansara Taylor, who is also a follower of Bob Avakian, was one of the, was the main initiator of Rise Up for Abortion Rights. This is a central question right now, facing women and all of humanity. So, that is an area where there's a tremendous amount of focus and attention. But this is all from the standpoint of, the centrality of the oppression of women, and the struggle to put an end to it. And, the fight around abortion is a key, front that concentrates just the big stakes of this. Will women, be able to achieve full equality, which cannot be achieved in this society, or be kept, confined and, put in a situation now with the, with the Supreme Court ruling as it is, and it might be this week, right? The court, medical abortions being forbidden, right? The so-called abortion pill. So, this is, these are very, very high stakes, and all of this is bound up with, the need to make revolution and the basis to make it, in that fury of women that has to be harnessed and unleashed, as this powerful force. So I'm just trying to give a picture of different elements of that. Okay.
Okay. Jim, back there. You mind me outing you?
This is a very complicated discussion. And we've already seen it almost, I wouldn't say hijacked, but there's certain things that people want to say that removes us from the basic question which the presentation was about. And that's exploitation. For me, it's about exploitation. I hope that at another time, the Revolutionary Bookstore will have a public discussion about decriminalization and legalization. Yeah. You will hear the people talk about decriminalizing, but you will not hear anything about legalizing. And it is an economic question that is very important, and you've already referenced the amount of national income in different countries that is based in prostitution.
Right.
Untaxed, by the way. You want to build a culture or a society of equality, then it has to be on all levels. But I want to talk to something different than that. Yes, I have known people that have survived prostitution. Sure. Yes, I have known women that loved it. They are the very few minority of people that I have known who have done sex work, quote unquote. And yes, it is sex work. And they can be exploited as workers. And I want to talk about the industry which was so glamorously put forward, the pornography industry. I'm so happy that this particular porn star and prostitute never had the experiences of most of the people that I have known who have been prostitutes. We haven't talked about organized crime, which controlled the sex industry in the time that you were making porn films. It's a little different now, but it's not really. The amount of drug addiction, the amount of suicide, the amount of prostitutes that are raped by cops. There's no place for a prostitute to go when she's been battered, bruised, or raped. And yes, rape can happen to a prostitute. I also want to talk about it from a different point of view. As a gay man, and Raymond, I would suggest that you might want to add what happened in 1969 when lesbians and gays, as a result of the things that had happened previously around race and women's liberation, also fundamentally challenged the society.
Right.
This is just a reminder. It's not a criticism. The role of religion, the role of shame, the kinds of things that are associated with sex work And I think Betty Dodson, for example, I'm sure that you loved, and I loved Betty Dodson because she said pleasure, sexual pleasure for women was so important. And we live in a culture and a society where, and it's worse now than it has ever been because of the role of pornography and what happens to boys. 10-year-old kids are watching porn on television, on their computer. We know that that's a national and international phenomenon. And what are they learning about sexual encounters between men, women, of any gender expression? What are they learning? And that's a huge problem. This, for example, my goal always as a gay liberationist was to merge who I was and my sexuality, put them together, not separate them. Prostitution, for the most part, makes the person divide themselves into this machine that's been commodified. And most prostitutes don't make a lot of money, but some do. We know about Xavier Hollander. They make superstars out of some of these whores that in the 60s and 70s and 80s wrote books about how wonderful their life was. And I don't deny your experience. But that's not the experience of most people. And I think we really need to talk about exploitation and the right to control one's body. We have to talk about class also. You know, you referenced in your pieces, Raymond, the college student, the graduate college student woman, but it could have been also a male, right, who decided to become a prostitute to pay for their education. We're talking about student debt right now, and people are hundreds of thousands of dollars in student debt. Right. You know, these are very complicated issues, and they really are. A lot of them, the emotional reaction is irrational, because we're not used to talking honestly about sex, about choice, about who gets laid and who doesn't. You know, who can afford it and who can't. There's so many different layers to this discussion that political correctness shouldn't be put outside that door when we have this kind of discussion. And by that, I don't mean throw away what this revolutionary bookstore is about, not at all. I'm talking, we have to really try to get in touch with how we really feel about this. What happens to old men that are poor? They can't buy girls, they can't buy boys, okay? But if you've got money, you can buy anything in this capitalist society that we have. And the exploitation of people's bodies is what's on the line in a discussion of prostitution. Will there always be prostitution? Well, if you had income equality, where people didn't have to do this kind of work because they were poor, or because they had no other way of making a living, and that's still real in this culture. You now have AI, which is going to make major redundancy among the educated class, let alone the uneducated class. And the income inequality will just continue to grow. And you have to put, I'm sorry, I don't say you have to do anything. I think about these things. I think about what happens when more and more people don't have enough money to pay for their food. $90 less in food stamps starting this month. What does that mean to those families? With the prices of food, which no one's talking about why they're so expensive, unaffordability. That's going to lead, I think, to criminal acts just to buy food. But that's another discussion. I just want to challenge everybody here, myself included. How do I really feel about a prostitute? How do I really feel about someone who's buying? I'll tell two stories and then I'll stop. When I was very young, I had a boyfriend who was the Iowa farm boy, blonde hair, blue eyes, who came to New York, and his male member was quite large, and he found out that he could make a lot of money by selling his body. He fell in love with me. I didn't know that he was a prostitute, hustler, whatever word you want to use. But I can tell you the sex was very difficult between us because he had commodified his body. He was so in love with me, but he found he didn't know how to negotiate free love with paid love, quote unquote. Okay? That's just one of the psychological conditions. He wound up jumping off the Brooklyn Bridge, by the way. Okay? We don't talk about what happens to people, the majority of people. If the role model was as the woman that is here tonight and says, I loved it, I didn't have a bad time, it was a real erotic relationship that was filmed. Yes, I think that that's true. I accept your story. But I don't think that's common from what I know from people who have done sex work. And in the gay male community, it has been so normalized, that what about intimacy? What about intimacy? What about, digital culture removes one backwards. And so looking and viewing at film or digital representations of sex, in my experience, and I'm an old man now, but in my sexual experience, which I still have an active sex life, it is very different, the encounter. Most prostitutes perform. Now, you said that you were, the erotic feelings between you and your partner in these porn films was real. That's not how most hookers work. Not the ones that I've known. They know what they want. They know how to please the client and get as much money out of that client as humanly possible and move on. Anyway, this is a very hard subject to talk about. And I'm very happy, Raymond, that you put it in the context of the social and economically global reality, not of the privileged upper middle class or white exceptionalism, American exceptionalism at the height of capital that allows us to make a kind of choices that most of the people around the world, principally women, who are forced because they have no other choice to go into prostitution.
All right. Are there other please sign up if you haven't. Those who are leaving, get on the email list. You have already. All right. Okay, so I'm sorry, I'm nursing a cold, so no.
Are there any other questions or things that, I know we have one up here, but if there's people who maybe you were provoked off, okay, go ahead. Wait till you get the mic so we can hear you.
Hi, thank you. So it seems as though as long as there's a demand and willing participants, there's always going to be sex work of some level. How do you address demand? I don't really think the demand is going to go away. I don't know if there's a difference psychosexually between sexes or not, based on neurology or how we're socialized, but I can't really imagine the demand going away. How do we address that part of the equation?
Okay, so I would really encourage you to get a copy of the pamphlet that I wrote, the research, and I actually speak to that. I mainly I mainly was emphasizing the supply side of global prostitution, what has, given rise to that. But we've also been touching on aspects of the demand side. And, and we are discussing and analyzing this as a phenomenon of a world imperialist system, a patriarchal, capitalist, imperialist system in which women are subordinated, in which in every sphere, and I gave examples in the beginning, in advertising, a beauty industry, in music, in rap, you go through every realm, and women, are sexualized and hypersexualized. Their value as human beings is inextricably bound up with their physical appearance in this society. Men are socialized, to look at women as objects of pleasure and domination. We talked about pornography, the demand, the spread of pornography, the consumption. I thought, that Jim's points were very important in terms of sexual exploitation. That this is an incredibly, it's difficult to talk about, but all this grotesquerie, the sexual degradation is enormously profitable. And then, the poorest, the most wretched of the earth are trafficked, into this, and they find their way, they are trafficked, into the circuits of the sex industry. They are moved from, as I said, from, Nepal to India, from China to the U.S., from Mexico, to the U.S. So this is a thriving industry, and there's a demand that's stimulated by the very nature of this system, how women are subordinated, how they are, positioned as the principal caregivers, in raising children, and that there's a role that they are expected to play in sexually satisfying, their male, and there is male entitlement in a patriarchal society. So, I gave that, I talked about that example of the Yale fraternity, right, which was a very ugly, I'm sure some people in the room remember this, right? And why are they saying no means yes, yes means anal? What does it have to do with the with the pornification of society, with the objectification of women in this society? With men being, with young boys, being, being inculcated, with the idea being, in everything that they see, that sexual conquest is a sign of achievement, is a sign of success, right? And so this, as I said, deeply permeates the society, and the growth of pornography has stimulated the demand for sex, for prostitution, and we are talking about the mass consumption, of sexual images, and we're talking about those who are providing those images, right, and which is serving this incredible transnational, sexual exploitation industry, rather. So this is a huge phenomenon, and one of the things that has also escalated the demand for this kind of sexuality, and again, pornography. I'm sure people in this room, have heard about, encountered, that pornography is has gotten so massive, so specialized. There's different body parts that are, that are highlighted. There are different types of relations of dominance and submission that are foregrounded. It's racialized, as I said. It's ugly. It's awful. And this is what people are consuming. And this is what's in other words, the demand is actually produced It's actually a function of the, of the whole society and the way it functions, and then you have this incredible growth of pornography, and that's not so much a response to some demand that appeared out of nowhere. It's actually something that is promoting, this consumption, and then it has its supply chains of mainly women, but not only, the men and boys, etc. That is all bound up with it. A particular factor in the growth of this is what I describe in the pamphlet as the growth of male revenge or revanchism, and this is an important development that has to be further analyzed. And what I'm describing is that there have been big social and economic changes affecting women, and more women entering into the labor force, into professions that they didn't go into before. And this has been the product both of the struggles of women, for equal employment, the struggle against those barriers, whether they're glass ceilings, the sexual harassment that they face. There's been this struggle, that has produced, pretty major changes. The traditional family, the male-headed single breadwinner family, that doesn't exist anymore in this society. It's not the principal form that the family takes. The family is mainly a dual income family. And then there are female-headed families, people not getting married. So there are these big changes that have taken place. And there is a response, on the part, and this is a global phenomenon, where you see women entering the labor force, the professions. There are more women that graduate from college now in the U.S. than men. And this has given rise to a revanchist response on the part of sections of men, that their entitlement, that their free, their ability to freely control women and to dominate, that this now, is being, is being questioned by women, and the actual social position of women, while still subordinate, is changing. So you have phenomena like, have people heard of incel? Right? Now, incel is a abbreviation for involuntarily celibate. Right? In other words, there's an actual movement of men, right, who resent the fact that women are not at their beck and call.
Sorry, not sorry.
I'm sorry?
I'm just kidding.
Are not at their beck and call.
I said sorry, not sorry.
Yeah, for sexual, for their sexual delectation. This is an actual phenomenon. Incel, organized, has its media outlets, right? And it's incredibly hateful and resentful towards women. Yeah. And a lot of this gets focused up on my right, to fuck and fuck you over. If I can just use clear and unambiguous language. And this revanchist phenomenon is being further stimulated by pornography and the imagery and the tropes, and the memes associated with this. So there are, in the work that I've been doing on this question, there's both the changes in the economy and society globally, big changes, seismic changes, but they are happening within the framework of patriarchal society, within the existing society, which is based on exploitation. So traditional social ties and bonds and relations are under great stress. They're fracturing, but the patriarchy still exists. This is all happening within the framework of this oppressive, I'm going to lose all my papers, within the oppressive, patriarchal formation. So this creates this, this incredible tension, and this is part of the reason, these changes that Bob Avakian has said that the question of the liberation of women is a powder keg, in society. It's a powder keg because of these changes, but they're taking place within the existing patriarchal, capitalist, exploitative framework. And he has said that it's going to be resolved either in a radically reactionary way, to force women, into the most submissive positions. They've taken away the right to abortion. People are saying, well, that could never happen. It's on the books, et cetera. Most people, you take polls and most people, uphold the right to abortion. Well, these Christian fascists, they organize and mobilize, and they are in power. They are, in control of the Supreme Court. This is what's happening, right? There is these, and I talked about that at the
I do want to say something in 1 second.
At the end of my talk. So I'm just saying that you have this revanchism, right? And you have, on the part of, this as a male social phenomenon, not all men, but this is very deep, and pornography, reinforces it and feeds it, and this is the state of affairs. So it's either going to be resolved, this powder keg of the position and oppression of women, it's going to be resolved in a radically reactionary way, and I've given examples of what's happening, or it's going to be resolved through revolution, so we can really go to work to uproot patriarchy. And that's where we're, that's kind of like this moment of extreme acuteness that we're facing in this society and the world. Yeah.
Yeah, I see that there was 2 hands. I thought I saw 2 hands. Was there anyone else who had a hand up right over there? Okay, I'm going to say a quick thing to this thing of the demand, and then I want to hear from you. One thing, if you listen to Charlie Sheen, people know who he is. One of the things that he said about prostitutes is he said, I don't pay her to have sex with me, I pay her to leave. And I think that concentrates something. It's like in porn, you never say, gosh, what books are you reading? Or how is it for you? Is this enjoyable? I mean, maybe it's like, kind of like funny, like, oh, you like this shit, But it's not really you care if this person's enjoying it. And so I just think that there is a whole way of us actually recognizing when you say what is being bought and sold, it is actually I don't want to repeat everything that you said because I think you said it very well, but that whole point of that what is being sold is not, okay, we're going to enter and, what you described of with my husband, we're, in love with each other, you want to do it. It's not that. And actually the men buying it, that's what they're buying, right? That's what they're buying. That's when you go to the strip club, I have guy friends. What do they say? Oh, well, it makes me feel fucking powerful. Well, I'm not friends with them anymore, but but it makes me feel powerful to know that, I can have, $10, and for this amount of money I can make a woman take off her clothes, for me. I had a friend she worked at a sex club, and she talked about how many women you talked about this, Jim, but on drugs, alcohol, all of this, because doing this over and over and over again, it was just destroyed them, and so I do think that there is the recognition of what it is that people are buying. What does this make? How is this different than other kind of work, which was in Raymond's whole talk. So that's one point. But then 2, I don't know about you all, but has anybody in here, you don't have to say it, you can just think about it, but think about a time when you had sex with somebody who you didn't want to have sex with, if that's ever happened to you. Now I want you to think about the girl in Thailand who has to do that 12 times a day. Think about that. And that rage that you feel, that fury that you feel for all those women around the world.
That's feeling.
That can be a powerful force for a fucking revolution in this country.
Right on.
And all you men, I see you, who you want to reject these traditional gender norms. You don't want any part of this, and you want to be in a world where maybe you can cry too, and what it means to be a man and all of this. And if you, want that kind of a world, this is why International Women's Day and, these celebrations, actually people feeling a whole different way that the world can be. Actually seen, it was tremendously amazing for me to know men who actually broke with a lot of the patriarchy and actually showed and modeled that, no, this is not human nature. And that can be a very, very powerful force. Don't underestimate that. And an attractive force in a time when a lot of people hate the way that the world is, feel a lack of hope. This can be a powerful driving force for a revolution to end not only the oppression of women, but the oppression of black people, immigrants, the whole world, a driving force to emancipate all of humanity. On this question, because it has everything to do with whether or not we're going to break all the chains. Because you can't say you want to break all the chains except one. And this has not always been this thing of, we get told, well, this is just the nature of human men. But it's not. It's the nature of this system. And actually, if you go back in human society, there hasn't always been prostitutes. You can look actually anthropologically, and the arisal of prostitution actually emerged with the class society, as did the oppression of women with class society and the family. So I guess I think that thing of actually, we do have to feel that, and then we have to go out and, go ahead. And we have to go out and we have to struggle with a lot of people. Look, if you want to get free, you got to get all the way free. You want to, if we're going to be emancipated, we got to emancipate everybody, or none of us are free. So that's it. So International Women's Day, I want to hear, we don't have to get into all of it now. I want to hear from everybody's questions. But I did want to say that we have to make this revolution real. Don't underestimate yourself. Come to this meeting on Thursday. Come on Sunday. And, let's go to work, on what kind of, how do we have this be a celebration where people feel, through song, through music, through dance, through defiance, a different way that the world could really be. So that's all I wanted to say.
Okay. We've got at least two hands.
And two people.
I see you, Jim, but we got two new people. The one in the back and then the person.
Yeah, hey everyone. I'm going to keep my mask on and hopefully you can still hear me through the mask.
We hear you.
So first, I just wanted to say, because I just had a really visceral response to really wanting to hear what the woman on the stage had to say, which was great. I know that, and I'm so glad that there are men holding men responsible and accountable, because it is so rare. And I'm seeing it more and more, and I'm so thankful for that conversation. It's just on my heart to say that it's very important that we make sure that we actually include women and sex workers and people, I don't know how to say this, I guess in the gender spectrum, who are actually having these experiences that, of course, it's going to be a conversation that could be very intellectual. Where can we go with this? How could it happen? But there has to be buy-in, right? There has to be women who, and people who are sex workers in general, who are involved in it as well, and really out there, not marginalized in this conversation about them. So I just want to bring that up just in case it gets lost in the sauce in our passion and everything. And then I wanted to address that question, that great question about demand, because I think that's the first thing that comes up whenever I have this conversation in real life with people, real life meaning outside of a forum. When I think of something like supply and demand, I think of the side of not just demand, particularly for something that most people wouldn't choose to do. I don't want to just say women. I would just say most people wouldn't choose to do sex work to earn their keep and to have a good life. Right. It doesn't mean that they're not sexual. Doesn't mean that they don't want to have erotic experiences or anything like that. But to actually pay for, let me take that out, to have a place to live, to have food to eat, and to feel safe and secure. Most people do not want to exchange sex for that. It is very demanding work. So when that supply dwindles down, it doesn't matter how high the supply is. The demand is. I could demand as a child that I want to eat cookies all day and every day, right? But it doesn't mean that I get that. So I think that's a really hard concept for people who have always been in a sense of sexual power, maybe even unknowingly. A lot of men and boys may feel that way. Well, we want this. And I think that was a really good point that I think it's Arnold had brought up around how manufactured it really is. And I'm just going to, this is my last thing I'm going to say. I thought, do I want to share this? I will. So me and my boyfriend, we decided to stop watching porn. And he decided on his own. And I decided on my own. Because it was kind of something a little shameful in a way, in that I think as a guy, he's like, I can't bring this up with my girlfriend. And for me, I was like, as a girl, should I be bringing this up? Did I watch porn? I don't know. But something that we realized without the studies and all that stuff on our own, was that the way that we relate to others, the way that we relate to sex, our satisfaction, all these different things were kind of negatively impacted by these messages and images. And we were very desensitized to certain things. We're almost fetishizing things just to get off on them, if that makes any sense. And through otherizing and fetishizing certain things, someone becomes an object, period. Right? So it was something we decided separately, and then we had a conversation about it. And I think, honestly, that, I don't know how to word this, but to just sum it up, I think that release from that system and from that way of thinking, like you said, could be so relatively quick. It doesn't have to be something that happens over 10 years or a generation. It was something that happened maybe over a few months, maybe even a year of trying to, but a year is relatively short in the grand scheme of things. That's all I wanted to say.
Right on.
Jim, didn't you have your hand up? You're after her.
Wait.
That person had their hand up, I thought. Yeah.
Hi. This conference or this discussion brings up a lot of different issues and a lot of confusion and also a lot of questions. Of course, it's always better to live in the question than in the answer. But one of the things that, I hear a lot of different firings coming up almost in opposition, but also in agreement. One thing that I heard from this young person who was sitting next to me was, would you participate? Would you, right? That was, would you participate in not legalizing, but decriminalizing it? And so my problem, and the answer was no. And my problem with this is, wait, you did.
That's not my answer. I said we support.
No. Okay, let me correct myself. The question was if there was a bill for delegalizing.
After that I asked. She's saying she said we don't. She's saying when I asked if you're actively doing any work to advocate for the decriminalization of sex work, you said no to that question.
Right. So, in other words, if there was a bill, you would say yes, let's vote to decriminalize it, but yet there's no action from here to go towards decriminalizing it. And so that when I heard that coming back from this very revolutionary group, I'm finding that to be off-putting. When I think about sex, because you have to think about sex, you don't just think about the sex worker, you think about sex. How are we identified from birth? Our gender is imposed. Our sexuality is imposed. How we play with things is imposed from babies. It just doesn't start when you start having sex. Sex is the moment that you become whatever that sex is and then defined by that. And revolution sometimes happens within that person in re-identifying who they are sexually, right? And I don't know if you understand what I'm saying, but there is, for some people, they have to revolutionize against the gender they're given, right, at birth. And so now I would say society in New York, I wouldn't say Kansas, is more accepting of this regendering of self, re-acknowledging of who you are. So when we talk about we want to have a revolution that changes the way men think and the way women may think about themselves based on what? Based on not just the imperialistic society, which I agree with, but I think it also goes to the normatives that we as women and men create because it makes sense. And so to change that, what makes sense, means to really break down a lot of barriers. When I think of sex workers, I think of somebody like Anita Hill, who was, sexually abused on her job and was not believed by a committee of people when she said, this happened to me. And that man is now sitting on the Supreme Court. And this repeated itself in this last round, right? So we're not talking about that this time is different. Because that time and this time are not the same time, but the same reaction happens. I was the first female bus operator when I went to work as a bus operator. I was so naive that my first day working, I went and bought a navy blue, skirt, suit, and I had my navy blue heels, and I was like totally floored by the fact that this was not acceptable. Why? Because I never got to play with trains, trucks. That was not my game. I had a lot of dolls. So I didn't know how to even conceptualize it. I had to create it in my mind, and then it was like a big bubble that went boop, because it was not accepted. I was the first female, so you can just imagine the tension of that invasion into male space, right? So we're not even talking about a sexual worker, but we're talking about what is normalized, what is conceptualized. Drivers of buses at that time should be men. It's men's work. Well, no, it's not. But that's what it should have been. And we have that repeated over and over. But it's known, it's absolutely known that sex work should be by women or gay men or trans men or children. There's a list. It's not just women. And those are the people who are being put into these positions. Now you have different levels, which is what you said also. You have people who are sourced from babies, and you have people who are sourced from the highest economic status, right? The problem is that when we talk about revolution, in my mind, it has to happen in the things that are so common and happen on an ongoing daily basis. It has to be understood on the conversation about, I don't know how you guys do revolution, but for me, being a bus operator and not quitting, that was revolution. That was me saying, hell no, even though when I went in there, the whole depot, the place where all the men, because there were men, would go and sit down and do their paperwork, the entire space was covered in, from I think the first edition of Penthouse. Yes. And it was like not just Penthouse, it was the other one, Playboy. And I walked into this depot, and my name is Donnie. So guess what? Did they expect me? No. They thought I was a boy coming in, so I was allowed in. And so that's how I got in. They used to close the door whenever a woman would try to get in. So what I did is I went straight into what at that time was called the location chief, and I said, look, I know you're not used to having women here, but this is uncomfortable. So I'm leaving here at 2 o'clock. I'm back at 10. Can you please make sure they're all gone? Well, girly, this was the conversation. Well, girly, you just got here. And I said, yes, and I'm going to stay here. And this is harassment against me as a female. So can you please handle this? And I walked out. Well, they were all gone. And when I went to go to my car, I had 2 tires slashed. You pay a price for revolution. You pay a price for where you stand, right? Anita Hill paid a price, but she stood tall. And I think she was a revolutionary. I think people who stand on their word, who break into little barriers, those are people who you have to look at as revolutionaries, and you have to look at it in a diverse way. This young girl, I can't remember her, Malala, I don't know her last name, her whole thing is about girls need to be educated. We need to educate girls. Well, there's also miseducation. We know that with what's happening in Florida, right? So what do? You have to fight to be able to be educated properly. There's so many different arenas. It's not just, like if we look at it as we just got to fight and get revolution and then we're all going to change and become this change utopian thing. I'm not diminishing what you're doing. I think it's brave. But it also means you got to break that down and come up with building blocks, tiny ones, little bigger ones, bubbles, whatever it is, in order for anything to really come to a change. Because those men in that depot, they had to change their thinking. And I even had a dispatcher years later come up to me And I always thought he was wonderful. I always used to say, hey, how are you? He came up to me and apologized because there was a blizzard, and he purposefully sent me out when it was a code red. You're not supposed to send any buses out. So I ended up coming in because somebody was stuck behind me who was senior. He was like, get out of the seat. I'm going to move your bus. And he did. So we both got into the depot. But otherwise, I would have been out on that thing for 36 hours. And he knew he shouldn't have sent me out. So he felt that. And you know who it sat with? With him. Because years later, he had to come and apologize. And I was like, oh, well, I'm glad you got it off your chest. I hope you have a change in your perception going forward.
All right.
Let me just say, as a pornographic actress, and I was one, I would have supported you in not wanting those in the walls in there. That's not appropriate.
Okay. So, wait, let's see. If there are other, it's, end it. Yeah.
Okay.
We're gonna let me just see any new hands. I mean, I'm fine with old hands,
Hey,
an old hand. That's a metaphor, a familiar person at the store. So anyway, are there any new hands? Jim, then I saw your hand go up, and maybe we're gonna, after you speak, we should we'll call it a night for the official formal program. But we'll hang out and we can talk informally among each other. Okay? So So, who was the? Did the woman leave? Who just?
No.
Oh, I didn't see who just spoke. Oh, yes, we are. Okay, someone's head was shrouding you. Okay, Jim.
Reality check. Okay. One of the only areas in which there's a potential for equality is in sexual relationships. And that means, and one of the paths to that, I think, or I've had that experience, is fantasy. And fantasy will reveal a whole lot about how people actually feel, about who they are, who you are, etc. But it's a healthy expression that if it doesn't devolve, and this is my own opinion, into fetishing. Because let's look at how race is treated in pornography, in sex work. Let's look at how black men are treated in pornography and in sex work. Let's look at how women with augmented breasts are treated in pornography, live sex acts, etc. I mean, there are so many dimensions to this question. Gender illusion, which is an art form, I believe, and the attack right now on quote-unquote drag by the right in the red states doesn't allow a person to be different. And the pornography sets up images and role models of how you're, particularly for men. I think women are much smarter about this. They figure out what they're supposed to give you, how they're supposed to behave, so they get paid. But men have a harder time, I think, realizing. And I will tell you, in my lifetime, I've seen men change. I've seen consciousness raising for men. I was lucky enough to be given the gift of consciousness raising by some of the women kicked out of the women's movement because they were lesbians. And I think when men talk to each other about who they are and are truthful with each other, and then also bring that into the conversation with their partners, is very, very important about how you detox what the culture, the capitalist culture of exploitation does to each of us individually. So this isn't going to be solved tonight. This is not going to be solved tonight.
But if we stay 2 more hours, we could possibly do it.
No, but Raymond, hopefully what we've done for each other is put some thoughts out that challenge. We don't have to talk it out. I can talk, but A lot of people, it's harder to talk about these kinds of intimate things.
Right.
But this is where the exploitation lives.
Right.
This is where the global exploitation of children, of young people, regardless of their birth sex or their gender expression, are exploited for the pleasure of rich people. You know, or people that work their asses off so they got the $50 or the $100 so they can buy some sex because otherwise they don't have it. There's so many different kinds of ways to look at this and ask questions about what do we want in a society. I don't want censorship. You know, I'd rather have my goal is to say as many times as I can in any public conversation, the right to be different and to be equal, the right to be different and to be equal, rather than all the identification and new language being invented. You know, just individuals are complicated. Prostitutes are complicated. We had a powerful example of someone who said, look, I had a good time. You know, she was lucky. Look at someone like Marilyn Monroe. I happen to know I knew her at the Actors Studio. She was a fantastically gifted actress, but she was an international sex symbol. And that's what happens to women. Right. They get sexualized and the whole personhood is not there. And the prostitute, if they're smart, male or female, will go, what does this guy or what does this girl really want? And I'm going to give it to them because they're going to tip me really big.
All right. So someone who hasn't spoken, yeah.
Hi. I'm just going to be here just for a moment if everybody can be with me in that for a second. I am noticing different generations in this space. I'm noticing different ages, and I'm reflecting on time as it pertains to revolution. I'm thinking about safe spaces and brave spaces, and the role of safe spaces for sex workers in revolutionary spaces. And I wonder if this space is a safe space for sex workers. Because as it pertains to young people and people in my generation, and as a graduate student who has had sex for money, I think that sex workers are going to feel safer with other sex workers as it pertains to revolution than the energy that I am feeling in this room. And I want to be a safe person and also challenge people's perspectives for sex workers and non-sex workers. And, right, coming back to the thing about time, right, getting young people involved in revolution. We have, broader concepts about spaces being safe for people to be themselves, to be individuals and different. And I struggle with if shame, if it is in this space at all towards sex workers and people who have conflicting feelings towards sex workers, what is the glue that is going to keep people together, keep them committed to showing up in spaces? I mean, this is about changing people's way of living. This is about changing people's relationship to what I'm doing with my time. And I don't really have an answer for that, but with such a large cultural shift and movement in sexual exploration, sexual identity. Sex workers, whether you agree with what they're doing or not, can help revolutionize, can change their ideas and ways of thinking. But I'm not feeling that everybody belongs in the revolution. That is not the predominant energy that I feel from revolution now. What I feel is, don't be an idiot, but join us. And so I wonder how that really calls young people into the movement as I see big generational gaps. And I don't really have an answer to that, but that's just my experience and what I'm feeling and what I'm sensing. How do people actually get together and stay committed to the road at this period of time right now, when the attention economy as it pertains to social media is just really fucked also, right? So that's what I'm feeling. Thanks for listening.
You had your hand up in the back? Yes. This is in response to this point?
It's in response to the last speaker and to, I don't remember who said it, to the person who acknowledged... I'm sorry. Is it on? Yeah. I'm also speaking to the comment made earlier about the men in this room, okay, and how they're different than most men out there. And I want to just start by saying safe spaces that people go to because they want to be protected from the horrible, horrific world that we live in and the system that we live under, is very harmful because it keeps that oppression going. It keeps people to want to just have their head down and retreat from confronting what's actually facing humanity. And so the same thing is, about the comment on the men in this room. I want to just read. There is a points of attention for the revolution that the revolution clubs that are part of this movement live by and fight for these principles, not just to be better people right now, but to set these standards for the world we're fighting for through revolution. And I will say that this is alive in revolution books, which is why you come in here and you have that different feeling, and why we open up principled struggle. Nobody was shut down in discussion here. This is a critically important thing to understand about the kind of space that this is. Not to retreat, but to make a revolution to end all this. So point 2 of the points of attention, we fight for a world where all the chains are broken. Women, men, and differently gendered people are equals and comrades. We do not tolerate physically or verbally abusing women or treating them as sexual objects, nor do we tolerate insults or jokes about people's gender or sexual orientation. This is the best kind of space, where people are coming together to work on making that revolution. And not everybody's going to come in and agree with it, and not everybody's going to want to jump in right away. The kind of dialogue that's gone on tonight is a very critical part of people finding the way out of this madness and nightmare that we live under. So I want to make sure everybody leaves with a copy of the points of attention and really think about why you need to come back to revolution books and continue to engage in this kind of culture and life. And you can start by coming on Sunday. That's what I wanted to say.
Okay.
I just, real quick, I'm sorry, what was your name?
Me?
Yeah, if you don't mind.
Jane.
No,
Jane?
I know you're Jane, but
so
you were...
I said me. Who are you talking
Yes. And the red scarf, I'm sorry. Isabella. Wait, do I know you, Isabella? Hello, good to see you. I thought it might have been you, but with the mask, it's hard to tell. So I guess my first question is that what is it about this conversation that you felt made it unsafe for sex workers? That was my first question.
I said that I wasn't sure. If it was, I don't believe that I explicitly said that it's not. And I agree, not everyone is going to come into these spaces right away. But everybody's welcome. Right. I do understand that everybody is welcome. But I also, in another, and this isn't the conversation for it, but sort of like, I'm also very curious about like the marketing and branding of this revolution. Like that's also something that has interested me in, in a different way. And I hear you on this thing about, going into spaces in which that I'm feeling protected, right? And I think that is important. And I think in the spaces in which people do feel protected is a space in which liberation can actually happen in really profound ways, and spaces to feel protected and safe despite the overwhelming shame that exists. Whether we can say consciously here, I have no shame and everybody's welcome, doesn't necessarily mean that there are subconscious thoughts and undertones that people have and think and feel, right? Which is none of my business, and I'm not going to bed with them, what people are thinking or are not thinking about me and, Elisa. So it's... I like to walk the tightrope of polarizing spaces. It's the place that I'm interested in being. I was a hospital clown by day and then a stripper by night. So I really know how to walk a fucking spectrum. You understand? Right? And there's something to that. In terms of being a different kind of person in the world.
I'm trying to say something, and that is that I expected to be attacked here. That's not what happened to me.
Yeah. Thank you.
I just wanted to, I think we are going to have to, end fairly soon. But I just, a few points. One, just to come back, I want to kind of close this out, but just to come back to the themes of this program, we were making an analysis of the astronomical growth and expansion, of commercial sexual exploitation, and what's driving that, and what is the essence of it, and that was what was spoken to in that clip from Bob Avakian, that whatever the intentions of those who engage in prostitution and sex work, the product of that, the content of it is the degradation of women. That is not to say that those who engage in it are criminals, or those who engage are what?
Or responsible.
Yeah, or people who, right. That the main reasons that people go into this is A, economic compulsion, and we've been talking about that. B, coercion, that is from sex traffickers, from pimps. The compulsion arises from the nature of this system. A number of people have spoken to this. Why do if you had a genuine socialist economy in which social need is what guides the allocation of resources and the utilization and of social wealth and the steering of society to overcoming all the divisions, social divisions among people, and to move towards a world without exploitation and oppression. You don't have that same economic compulsion, and at the same time you're waging a struggle against the subjugation of women, against this patriarchy. And people have spoken. The woman who told the story of going to the bus depot. There is a gendered division of labor. Pornography is used as punishment and revenge against women. These are all the kinds of phenomena that that people have been putting on the table. And another reason that people go into pornography, in addition to the compulsion, the coercion, is that that the oppressed internalize the values of the oppressor. That is a phenomenon in society. You have people in you have youth in the Black and Latino communities who internalize I got to get mine, I got to be on the top, I got to own the block, I got to control the trade. This is all just internalizing, the values and the ways of the system. And this affects people, the oppressed. And it's not their fault. It's the system that operates this way and that gives people those choices. That was a big theme in my talk. What are the choices that are put before people, and people choose that. And it's not their fault. But people have to step back. There is an analysis of prostitution, sex work, and that's one thing. But for people who are engaged in it, we've had the experience tonight. People, they are welcome into this store. And this is a space, right, which, is really a base to project this revolution, to organize and mobilize for this revolution. And we're going to have very robust, as I said, very robust and principled discussion and debate. And I thought that one of the really, sort of inspiring elements of tonight's discussion was that there was a lot of frankness, people talking about their own life experiences, and lived experience counts for something. But lived experience is not, you have to go beyond the lived experience to understand what's at work underneath, what's shaping, the decisions that people make, what's shaping the conditions of their lives. And that's what we were getting into in my presentation tonight, the whole workings of this system. And when we talk about revolution, we need to be scientific about understanding what is the problem that's before humanity, this system. What is the solution? It is to make a revolution. The question came up, what is revolution? Look, revolution is the overthrow, the armed struggle of tens of millions of people led by visionary scientific leadership. And we have that in Bob Avakian. It is the conscious collective overthrow of this system and the replacement of this putrid, profit-based, oppressive system by something liberatory, new institutions, a new economy, new ways of relating to each other. And that's going to be, a deep going, and profound process of change. And we are, we have a slogan, fight the power and transform the people for revolution. In other words, come here and we get into these discussions, but as Jane said, we're not retreating from the world because there's no protection from this world. There's no protection from the horrors of this. If there was, we wouldn't need to make a revolution. We need to make a revolution to put an end to this. And it regenerates. These horrors regenerate and take new form. They morph. This is what we're witnessing, today. So, here we get deeply into these discussions, but this place is really a base for this revolution. We say it's the political, Carl introduced the store, the political, intellectual, and cultural center of the movement for a real revolution. And we open up this kind of discussion and debate, and we are organizing people into this revolution. So, we want to have these kinds of discussions. And I thought it was very powerful tonight that we had, theoretical, some theoretical wrangling. We talked about, the contours of this whole, commercial, sexual exploitation on a global scale. And then people did bring their life experiences into this, and big questions were raised. So we got to go further with it. And, this is all the stuff of people becoming, exposed to and acquainted with this revolution and learning more about, the science and the leadership to make this revolution and how we can, transform our thinking, right now through this kind of process, as part of building this movement for revolution. And, I think tonight, we had
like really soon, you guys.
The revolution.
Yeah, like really soon.
Right.
Not like someday we're going to have this magical change. Like, we have to, like, overthrow them, like, pretty soon, because there's going to be, like, a fascist consolidation of power if we don't. So let's get to work. And it's possible.
So it's the possibility for making this revolution. This is what I got into at the end of my talk. This possibility has grown for all kinds of reasons that we're going to get more deeply into in further discussions. But we can't waste this chance. We can't squander an opportunity to make a revolution in the strongest, most powerful empire in human history. This would take an incredible burden off the backs of world humanity to us to make a revolution in this country. And that's the challenge before us, and that's the challenge I put before you to learn more about and to become part of and contribute to with your ideas, with your criticisms, with your insights, and with your creative energy. So with that, I think we should end the program, and people can stick around, and it was great.